Melinda Eitzen Show. I'm Melinda. Today we're going to talk about how to have a great divorce, as strange as that sounds. And we're very blessed to have with us Jennifer Hargrave, very accomplished, excellent family lawyer.
Well, thank you, Melinda. It's
You're
nice to be
welcome.
here.
I'm so glad you're here. So, how long have you been practicing family law now?
I started practicing family law in 2006. At that point, I had already been a lawyer for 10 years, and I had actually worked as in-house counsel in the financial services industry. And so it was a big shift, but I was really drawn into family law because I had learned about collaborative divorce, and that was something that was really interesting to me.
Oh, yes. And you have your own firm.
I do. I started this firm in 2017, so we've been going for about 6 years now. And we have 4 other attorneys. We have, paralegals. We have a great support team there to help our clients transition through divorce.
Well, I can speak with authority because I have worked with you and mediated for you that you all do a great job. So I'm glad that you're here today.
Well,
So
thank you.
tell us, how are people going to have a great divorce?
I know it sounds crazy, but I really like to talk about it because I think a lot of people don't even know that that's possible. When they're thinking about divorce, they're thinking about the War of the Roses, and where they're just
like on
smashing
TV.
plates against the wall, and certainly there's so many stories of very, very high conflict, very traumatic divorces, and that does happen. But there are also stories of people who have really, really good divorces. And so I've spent time really looking at some of my clients who navigated the divorce process in a way that really set them up well for the next chapter. And as you know, I'm sure your clients too, the next chapter can be really great.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes, people are distraught. Obviously, it's a major life change. It's hard for them to see the future, but I always tell them a year from now, you're going to look back and say, oh my gosh, Melinda was right. I'm okay. It's going to be okay.
I know from time to time I'll talk about someday your future spouse will be like, no, I'm never getting married again. And then, sure enough, 18 months later, they're
Right.
getting married.
We're doing their prenup.
Yeah, exactly. So, there are some common characteristics that are present when people have really good divorces. And I broke it down into an acronym so I can remember it called CREATE. And really,
I like that.
the focus is on helping our clients create their next chapter, their best life after the divorce is over. Right? I think too often people think of divorce as like a destination, a defining moment in life. And I always say it really is just a period of transition. There are going to be a lot of changes that are happening. But if you go into it with the right mindset, the create mindset, I think you can come out the other side and really, really live a full, vibrant life.
So what is the C?
So C, I like to start off with communicate. And I know this is going to sound a little opposite, to make sure that you're communicating about the divorce with your spouse. But I think time and time again, when we blindside our spouse with a divorce, we set off a really dramatic beginning to the divorce process. People feel betrayed. They feel hurt. They feel like they've been lied to for all these years. And so I think it's really important, if you're thinking about divorce, that you're beginning the conversation with your spouse. This really isn't working for me. What are you willing to do? What am I willing to do? And not everybody can do that. There's not a safe space to do that. And there are certainly reasons, especially in domestic violence situations, when that would not be prudent. So you need to talk with your lawyer about that. But I think for most people, they should be having the conversation that, this marriage isn't fulfilling. It's not working for me.
I completely agree. When anybody hires me, I always tell them, on TV, how you see someone served, I don't do that. Because it's just like you're talking about, they're surprised. They don't know it's coming. Why do that? It makes people defensive. They think we're going to war. So I advise them, you need to tell them, hey, every step of the way, hey, I'm thinking about divorce. Hey, I'm talking to a lawyer. You should hire a lawyer. My lawyer's drafting a petition.
Exactly. And when we do that, we're laying a foundation of trust, which I think is important. If you have children together, your life, you're going to have to continue to communicate with that person post-divorce anyway, and laying a really good foundation. One tool that I really like to suggest to people is something called discernment counseling. I don't know if you've heard of discernment counseling,
Do tell.
but this is really awesome. There's a great program here in Dallas called the marriageplace.com. Kim Bowen and And so she takes people through this process. It's not marital therapy. And, a lot of times when your marriage is broken down, it's past the point of marriage therapy. Like marital therapy is not going to help at that point. But discernment counseling it'll be like 2 to 6 sessions usually. And it's a place where people are really asking the question, what would it take for this marriage to work? And do we have what it would take to invest in that? Am I willing to do that? And I think it's such a great tool for having that initial conversation because it lays the groundwork. And it is then a decision that you both are coming to most often that, yeah, it isn't working for me either, Because usually if a marriage isn't working for one person, it's really not working for the other person. They just don't know it yet, right?
Somebody may be in denial.
Yeah.
Or they've just accepted not having a functional marriage.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people are that, you just kind of get along. It's like a worn out pair of shoes, at least they're comfortable to an extent, or maybe they're not comfortable, but they're familiar. And so making that change is really hard. So I oftentimes recommend discernment counseling, and sometimes people decide that they do want to continue to work on the marriage, and that's great. That's a win.
And I think I like the part you said about what would it take to invest in it? And are they capable of that investment? Some people just aren't, maybe because of underlying problems they have. They're not willing to go get alcohol free or,
That's exactly right. Or make those changes, and look, if my spouse is asking me to change, they can't force me to change. I always have the option to say no. It's just understanding what that means and what those ramifications are. And that's why I think it's really helpful to have the conversation in a therapeutic setting with a therapist there who can help direct resources. She knows a lot about trauma training. But the interesting thing about discernment counseling is it originated up in Minnesota. So there's a whole, like if you go and you Google discernment counseling, there are therapists all across the country providing discernment therapy. And so I think it's a really good thing. More people need to know about it and look into it.
Yes, I think it sounds intriguing.
Yes.
Okay, so that was your C.
Yes.
Are we to R?
R. So realistic. Get realistic about how the process works, about what the possible outcomes are. A lot of times people come into the divorce process with very, very bad information.
Oh gosh, their neighbor.
My
neighbor
their
said,
best friend. Yep.
The internet said,
Yeah.
Oh my word.
And one of the things that's interesting that people don't realize is that every state is different. And so if you're talking to your best friend from college who got divorced in California, her divorce is going to be very different than a divorce in Texas.
Oh, and it's discouraging because California, as an example, they have such wonderful alimony laws if you're the one receiving alimony, and we have such barely existing spousal maintenance laws here. So that could be definitely cause someone to be unrealistic.
Yeah. And I think you need to go into it with an open mind and really, get educated, be curious, and be interested in knowing how this works and what the likely outcomes are. Every time we're negotiating a deal, we're always negotiating against what would happen in court, right?
Yes,
What's your
yes.
best alternative to a negotiated agreement? And so, working with a lawyer like yourself who has lots of experience and who knows what happens in the courthouse, we're able to give our clients good information about what is likely to happen in the court. And then that kind of can become a benchmark for, if they're offering more, that might be a really good deal for me to take, or it might not. So it's just, I think being realistic about the possible outcomes is really important.
Which means they have to be a good listener.
They do. And like I said, they have a curious mind. I mean, be willing to look into this. And, maybe you need to consult with a couple different lawyers before you decide who. Hopefully you're getting the same advice. Although, there are certainly areas where lawyers differ in their opinion.
Yes.
But, hopefully whoever you're consulting with is giving you honest answers and not just telling you what you want to hear.
Yes. Well, selection of the lawyer is important. That can dramatically affect their situation. So, maybe they talk to more than one. Maybe they ask each one what they think of the others.
Yeah.
We all know each other.
We do. All right. So the next E is to begin with the end in mind. So I really like to encourage people to think about, once they have an understanding of what's realistic, what do they want this next chapter to look like? And as you and I were talking about, a lot of times people have no idea. It's very, very hard to see past the divorce. And yet, if you will spend a little time and begin to imagine, begin to envision what that next chapter can be, once you have a good understanding of the reality of, of how the system works, then I think that really becomes the anchor as you navigate divorce. It's so easy to get sidetracked, right? When you're in the throes of the negotiation process and the other side is just ticking you off, or maybe they're not responding to something, or it looks like all these red herrings, and like we can go off in all these different directions trying to chase down various information, or trying to make somebody pay for the bad acts, or whatever it is. But when you can stay focused on what you want this end to look like, then that really becomes, the map that's going to guide us as we make these decisions. Because some of these decisions are really expensive, right? I mean, lawyers love conflict. We love to fight it out. That's how we make our money. And so, when you stay focused on that end, then you're going to make better decisions about the conflict that you're going to allow in the divorce process.
Yeah, pick your fights, right?
Pick your fights.
Not everything needs to be a big fight. One thing I really had a realization about is our audience is most likely the spouse, meaning most cases settle. So if most cases settle, then the person I have to convince to give me a good deal is the spouse, not the judge. I'm probably not going to be, like 85% of cases settle, probably not going to be selling it to a judge or jury. I'm selling it to the other spouse. So to your point from the very beginning, like how we behave, do we treat them respectfully, or do we sound every war bell we can sound? That's going to affect the end in mind of how are we getting a deal from them?
That's exactly right. And so, when we don't allow them, whatever they are doing, whatever the other side is doing, right? When we're reacting to that, we are allowing them to change who we are. And so when we're clear about where we want to end up, where we're going, when we're clear about our own values, then we're able to make better decisions that are best for us, not in reaction to the things that somebody else is doing.
Well, and we're not being nice to them because they deserve it. Maybe they don't. But we deserve to get the best deal we can.
That's exactly right. And I'm not an advocate of being nice. Like I don't think being nice is the strategy, right? But I think being smart is the strategy.
Yes.
Making decisions that are really, what do I want in this moment? What is most important to me? And that's how we protect ourselves. If we're just constantly reacting and allowing somebody else to change who we are, we're really giving our power away.
It's so horrible when you have a case where the other lawyer is the type that writes the ugly letter, right?
Talk about ugly letters.
And my client is like, you need to write an ugly letter back. And I'm like, no, that doesn't really help anything.
Don't. I know, it really doesn't. It's like, I tell my clients, like, we're going to send this letter and I just want you to know, here's what's going to come back. And I can predict with about 99% certainty what's going to come back and when it's going to come back. And, then at least I get to be right and say, I told you so. But yeah, I mean, the nasty letters, I mean, this is what... I think lawyers are trained to do this. I don't know, because most of us do it, and we send those little nasty, snarky grams about X, Y, and Z, and it really isn't productive. So
it's not using our best communication tools.
It is not. It is not. And a little secret, right? When I'm working with a really good lawyer who I really value and appreciate and respect, it's not uncommon because there are times when we do need to address. If there's something bad that's going on, we need to address it. But usually I'm going to pick up the phone first and say, hey, Melinda, I just wanted to let you know this is what's going on, right? And then send the letter that needed to be sent, but it comes after conversations.
Yes. Warning.
All right. The next letter is A.
Yes.
And this stands for agreement and alignment. Like you and your partner need to be in agreement ultimately on the major issues that need to be decided in a divorce. So, the first question is, well, what are those issues? And so, a lot of times people come into the divorce process saying, we're in agreement on everything, except we don't. When you ask them, no, we don't know what we're going to do with the house. We don't know where the kids are going to live. No, we haven't decided on a possession schedule. And so they're really not in agreement on anything except that they want a divorce. And that's a good place to start.
And that they want to be in agreement.
And that they want to be in agreement. But really, working with your lawyer to really understand what are the issues that need to be decided. Are there other issues that we want to include? Does it make sense to include those? Not everything needs to be in a decree, right?
Yes, yes.
And sometimes I think we can overwrite decrees and include provisions that just really aren't going to be helpful post-divorce. They may be setting up expectations and are just going to leave you frustrated.
Or confusion.
So really focusing on those issues. And the other thing I tell people is, well, you need to be in agreement on those major issues. And we can go over those in just a second. You don't have to see eye to eye on everything. So I'll often use this as an example. Like when we're looking at a spreadsheet, like you and I don't have to agree on what the value of the house is.
Right.
But so long as we agree on how the proceeds are going to be divided. So if you're going to get X amount of dollars out of the house, or we're going to split it at a certain percentage, then that's what we need to agree on. But we don't need how we got there to that final number. Like we're never going to see eye to eye on all of those things.
No, agreed. I usually tell people when I'm mediating, at some point, you just have to start looking at the deal as acceptable or not acceptable from your lens, because we're not going to convince everybody of every number that's a soft number.
That's exactly right. And we may build in waste of assets claims, and we may build in all kinds of extra, claims that the other side will never agree with, but so long as we, what we know is it's really about the end number. It's about the final division. And so if we can get there, then we'll be in agreement.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, and I was going to say, let's touch on the things that really need to be agreed. So if you have kids, you need to agree on how decisions are going to be made regarding your children, right? Especially the big decisions. You need to think about and consider, how are you going to decide where the kids go to school? Are they going to live in one home primarily? What's the geographic restriction going to be? We need to talk about how will medical decisions be made, and also therapy. And those are really the big things, right?
Yes. I think with school choice, is it private school? The child's been in private school. Is that going to continue? Does everybody have to agree every year? Does payment attach to decision making on private school? Like you can't really say, well, you have to keep them there if you're not willing to help pay for it.
No, usually. You can't really do that usually. So that's exactly right. And then obviously the possession schedule, and there's a lot of good information out there. I know you all have good information on your website too about how to craft a possession schedule. There's the family code that gives us a standard schedule. So look into that and know what is that, and what, are there areas that you want to make changes to that. And then of course child support, and that's a big one where a lot of people get stuck on. But again, our family code provides a system for determining that. So.
It's the simplest in a way, because it's just a math equation from the family code perspective, but the math equation is not always satisfactory to people.
That's right.
And it certainly does not cover all the child's expenses in most cases. So we still have to address things like school, extracurricular, other things that are expensive about raising children. But the child support piece itself could be simple.
It can be. And that's where, spending a little time knowing what's realistic is really helpful and will help streamline your case. So anytime you're asking for something that's outside of kind of the zone of what's realistic, that can cause delay, cause consternation.
This is how I think about it. If you're asking for something that their lawyer's going to tell them that you will never get at the courthouse, then what are you going to give them to get it?
That's exactly right.
Something they would never get at the courthouse.
Right. And that's where it helps to look at, aside from just the property, we'll talk about that in a minute, but, there are other things that are helpful to know that do work as leverage, like a timeline for divorce. So if you're willing, to help speed this up if that's what the other side is wanting, and to move this along, and just to keep things private, and just get it done. There's a lot of leverage in that, and I see people blow that leverage all the time.
Yeah, that's something that you can't get without cooperation of the other person.
Nope.
So buy it.
So if you're willing to offer that, there might be a payoff for you on the other side. And so I think I see a lot of divorces start with, very high acrimony. Their spouse sort of have them served with papers. There are all these allegations being made, and it's kind of crazy. And, my client is sitting there saying, well, I would have agreed to, let her keep the house, and I would have agreed to all these things, but not now.
Yes, they hit the war bell.
That
is never good.
It's never good.
And people do it on accident. They don't even know they're hitting it sometimes.
They don't know they're hitting it. And I think that's what, like, conversations like this are so important, because if the lawyer that you're working with isn't telling you this stuff. Right. Then, and their only trick of the trade is to hit the war bell. Then you just need to know that it's okay to question your lawyer and ask, is there another way to do this?
Yes.
Because some lawyers are really good at hitting the war bell, and the war bell there is a time and a place for that.
Oh yeah.
But for most of our families, we do not need to be hitting the war bell.
I think the war bell usually comes in place when one side has a mental health disorder that causes them not to be able to be reasonable and negotiate.
Agreed.
And so then you have to. You don't have an option but to get the court to help.
That's right. And if there's an emergency situation, if you have a spouse who has succumbed to serious, addiction issues and so forth. And I mean, there are definitely, when there's a danger, and there are those times. But for most families, that just isn't the case. And even if there are personality disordered traits. I mean, everybody comes in these days saying my spouse is a narcissist. And I think most of the time they're right,
And most of us have a few of those traits. Lawyers, we all have a few of those traits.
That's exactly right. And, that kind of those kind of behaviors can make negotiating challenging, but also it's all that much more important to be smart in how you're approaching the divorce.
Yes.
So
are we on A?
A was agreement and alignment. So
good.
T is trust and transparency.
Okay.
I'm throwing in extra letters, but I like the sound of it. So obviously, like, if you're going to have a good divorce, you both need to be committed to sharing information.
Oh, I cannot agree more.
And I think that's where, having a good lawyer that you're working with, I mean, they're going to require it of their clients. And, we can agree to exchange all the information that needs to be exchanged that we need to get the divorce done without having to go through the laborious, expensive discovery process.
It's a low trust time, and you can make that worse or better by how you provide information.
That's exactly right. It is already. I mean, most people are not exactly trusting of each other fully. And for, there's good reasons attached to that. But yes, if you can be ready to show up and share the information. And, if you've got a big job offer coming and there's a big deal in the works or something, I mean, I just, time and time again, we see people try and hide that kind of stuff. We find out about it. And all that does is destroy the, your future together. And most of the time, that deal that is down the road that's going to happen, like, it isn't going to impact the marital estate today, or it'll have minimal impact. So sharing the information isn't really terribly costly.
Yeah. Sometimes I took over a case recently, and the client had instructed the first lawyer, I don't want to give her anything.
Yeah.
And so the lawyer just accepted that answer, and they objected to everything, provided barely any information. The other side had to compel it all and go ask a judge to make them give it. And they did have to give it. And I was like, that was so stupid.
It's so stupid. Yeah. And it creates lawyers' fees. Again, lawyers make money off of conflict. And there are some lawyers that this is how they think they're supposed to lawyer, is by hiding the ball and playing hardball. And it just causes so much ridiculousness.
I think the lawyer has a duty to explain to the client, I know emotionally they're like, I don't want to give her anything, but it doesn't really work that way. And ultimately you're going to have to provide it. So why pay thousands of dollars for the privilege of eventually giving it to her? But now she's furious, and it's going to be harder to settle.
That's exactly right. And that's where, again, that R is so important. Know what's realistic, even if it isn't what you want or what you think should happen. It's how the
Mhm.
system works, and you're going to have to give over information. So,
Mhm.
you know, when I look at couples who have had a really successful divorce, there was a level of trust that they both were willing to respect in the process.
Mhm.
And even if they didn't like each other, or they didn't want to be around each other, and they didn't want to be married anymore, they at least knew that the other person was being forthright
Mhm.
and coming forth with information.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
okay, that's trust and transparency, and then the final E. And I spend a lot of time thinking about this because the word I use is empowered. So the people who I see who come through the divorce process um, and really use this time as a time of transformation are really people who step into their own power, right? It is so easy to just blame the other person, and to not really do the hard work of looking at what did I contribute to the failure of the marriage. Not to beat yourself up, or not because of shame, but really in order to make changes and do things differently next time,
Mhm.
so you're not reliving that pattern. And I think when you're really ready to stop blaming the other side, because really when you're blaming the other side, all you're doing is you're giving your power away. You're giving your power to the other person.
That is my test for a personality disorder. If I say to my client, "What part did you have in the failure of the marriage?" and they say none, then I'm like, "Oh dear,
Red
I'm in trouble."
red flags.
Because even if it's 2%, we all contributed in some way.
Yeah.
Everyone who ends up with a failed marriage, they did something.
Sure. And look,
It
nobody's
takes two.
perfect. It does take two, and nobody's perfect. And it doesn't mean that the other person didn't do bad things. That certainly it can be the case. But whatever that part was that kept you in that relationship, that attracted you to that relationship, that, how you showed up in that relationship, if you were an avoider and you were avoiding communication, you were avoiding voicing what you wanted, or you were, living in fear, or whatever it was, even when you're married to somebody who's like bad and maybe they deserve to be punished. But when we can let go of that and really
Mhm.
focus on ourselves and learn how to take care of ourselves and protect ourselves and keep ourselves safe,
Mhm.
learn how to honor our own boundaries,
Mhm.
we set ourselves up for really good, healthy relationships in
I
the next
like it.
chapter.
Empower.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the create model for having a great divorce.
I like that model. Now, I know you do a lot of collaborative law.
Mhm.
Do you think that's a good forum for the create model?
I think the collaborative divorce process it can be a great a forum for that. Absolutely, because that's really what we're doing is helping people be their own decision makers in the process. We're requiring that transparency as part of the
Mhm.
process. So for so many people, we can get really creative and really, create an outcome that's positive and help give them the resources in the process. So I always say divorce is a period of transition,
Mhm.
but if we're willing to open up our minds and our hearts for it, it can be a period of transformation.
Oh, that's good.
And really, when we leave the divorce process, we are well equipped for this
Mhm.
next chapter.
There's a lot of education that occurs through a divorce. It might be somebody who's less financially sophisticated. They learn more about their assets and what those assets are and how they work, and how that would work in the future.
Yep.
And so that's an educational piece. And we also have a communication education, because they need to learn to communicate to get through it. And if they have kids together, they need to be able to co parent and communicate in a healthy way.
That's exactly right. And I think one of the other really valuable parts of the collaborative process is that you learn you're not doing it alone. You have a team there to support you.
Mhm.
And that's going to be critical in that next chapter, right? If you're accustomed to having your spouse take care of all the handyman things, for example, learning to find good resources to help you with that post divorce is going to be great. Working with a financial planner, even if you were the one who handled the finances in the marriage, it can be really great to have that financial person on our team, on our collaborative team. And, that allows you to ask questions and to look at things differently and really get additional information. So I just think there's so many great resources in the collaborative process that you learn
Yes.
that will really help you in that next chapter.
So in collaborative and out, when people have a tendency to communicate in a high conflict manner, I always recommend the Biff book by Bill Eddy.
I love Bill Eddy. Big Bill Eddy fan. Yes. Yes.
It really helps people to have a little roadmap. It's simple, to write the email in a way that that you can push send and not regret it.
The funny thing is, so BIF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. So that's what your communication should follow, those 4 things. And I have had the opportunity to use this on so many occasions with opposing counsel. When responding, because it's so easy to get hooked into the drama. Like they're baiting you, and when one of those nasty letters shows up, right? And they're baiting you to get embroiled in the drama. And I always say, once we're in the win-lose mentality, where we're trying to win, make the other person lose, like really, we're all losers at that point.
Yes.
And so it just that there's a power struggle there. I say that a lot with teenagers too, by the way. I've learned the minute I get into a power struggle with my teenager, I've lost.
That's so true. He also says, don't give advice, don't admonish. I think like there's
don't
3
advise,
A's.
admonish, or argue.
Yes. So he, it's very hard. I have so many clients who are parents who want to say, you're a bad parent because in the exchange. And I'm like, oh, no, we're not supposed to do that.
No, and really listen, I can't, it is so important to understand that we're independent agents. Like I have my own agency and you have your own agency, and that I want you to change, to do things differently, to make me feel comfortable is my problem, right? If you're doing something that makes me uncomfortable, that's my issue to resolve. Now, obviously there are things where children, they need to wear their seatbelts in the car. Yes, they need to be in car seats. Like there are safety issues where people do have bad judgment about that. And maybe they need to be, we need to ensure that there are safety measures in place. But for the most part, your child is going to need to learn how to have a relationship with that parent, even though they don't do things exactly as you do them. Yes. And your child's also going to need to learn to have a relationship with you during times when they don't want to do things your way, right? Yes. Because they have their own agency. And we have to learn how to navigate that. I think so much conflict and so much relationship destruction is caused when we're trying to get the other person to do the things that we think are right. Like they're not going to. So the sooner we can accept that, the more freedom we're going to have.
Jennifer, it's so wonderful to talk to you today. And if somebody wants to reach you, we're going to put on the screen how to find you. That's right. I would highly recommend Jennifer. She does a great job. You can tell she cares about people just from hearing from her today. Plus, she knows the law. That's important.
Thank you, Melinda. And it's great to work with wonderful people like you as well.
It's great having you here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And that is our show today.